August 15, 2021, 11:47 p.m. Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies break down apartment door 2B on Madison Avenue. The smell hits them first. Bleach mixed with something else, something human. Her name was Joyce, 29, hanging from the ceiling by rope, conscious but barely breathing. Carved into her back, fresh and deliberate, a swastika, deep enough to scar forever. She was Jewish. 20 miles south in Rocklin, Cameron Gabriel was already dead, shot in his own bedroom 3 weeks earlier, while police had no idea the cases were connected. No idea that the same man who tortured Joyce had tracked down her other Tinder date and executed him in the dark. By sunrise, investigators would discover that a dating app had become a hunting ground, that jealousy had turned into systematic torture, that one man's rage over not being chosen had left 2 victims and a trail of evidence that would make seasoned detectives physically sick. Thanks to everyone watching and subscribing. Your support keeps these stories alive. So now, the question isn't just what drove Damon Benson to torture and kill. It's how does a man convince himself that not being someone's only choice justifies destroying their entire world? And how many others are out there, swiping right, waiting for their fantasy to crack? Joyce Martinez worked with her hands. Small, steady fingers that cleaned teeth, calmed nervous patients, and typed careful responses to Tinder messages late at night in her Sacramento apartment. She was the middle child of 3, born to parents who came to California with nothing and built a dental practice from scratch. Joyce inherited their work ethic, their kindness, and their belief that good things come to those who wait patiently. By 29, she'd been waiting long enough. Her last relationship ended 2 years earlier, when her boyfriend decided he wasn't ready for commitment. She spent those 2 years focusing on work, taking weekend trips to Napa with her sister, learning to cook Thai food from YouTube videos, and slowly accepting that maybe love required a little more effort than just hoping it would find her. That's how she ended up on Tinder in February 2021. Not desperate, not lonely, just ready. Her profile was honest, real photos, no filters. She wrote about loving hiking trails and terrible reality TV. She said she was looking for something genuine. She matched with Damon Benson on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Later, investigators would call this ironic. Joyce called it hopeful. Damon's profile looked safe. Professional photos, clean appearance, bio that mentioned his love for fitness and personal growth. He didn't send crude opening lines or ask for her Instagram. He started with a simple, "Happy Valentine's Day, beautiful. Hope you're having a good one." They talked for 3 weeks before meeting. Joyce later told her sister it felt different, mature. He asked about her family, remembered details from previous conversations, sent good morning texts that weren't sexual or pushy, just sweet. Their first date was coffee at a place near her work. He showed up on time, paid for both drinks, walked her to her car. No pressure for a second date, just a gentle, "I'd love to see you again if you're interested." But here's what Joyce didn't know. While she was falling for Damon's careful attention, she was also chatting with someone else on Tinder. Cameron Gabriel, 48, a divorced father of 2 who lived in Rocklin and worked in construction. If you're finding this story as compelling as I am, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me bring you more cases like this one. Cameron's approach was different from Damon's, less intense, more casual. He'd message Joyce every few days, share funny memes, ask about her weekend plans. Where Damon felt like a potential boyfriend, Cameron felt like a friend who might become something more. Joyce didn't see this as deceptive. She wasn't exclusive with either man. They were just talking, getting to know each other, keeping her options open like millions of other single people do every day. She went on her second date with Damon in early March. Dinner at a nice restaurant, more conversation about their goals and values. He told her he'd been single for a year, focusing on himself, ready to find the right person to build something with. That same week, she had coffee with Cameron. It was lighter, easier. He made her laugh, didn't take himself too seriously. He told her about his kids, his weekend softball league, his terrible cooking skills. Joyce felt lucky. 2 good men, both interested, both treating her with respect. She planned to see where things went naturally, maybe choose one eventually, maybe discover that neither was right for her. It felt healthy, adult, normal. What she didn't realize was that Damon Benson wasn't the kind of man who shared well. By April, Joyce was seeing Damon twice a week. He'd integrated himself into her routine seamlessly. Wednesday dinners, Saturday morning hikes, Sunday afternoon Netflix sessions, where he'd bring takeout and she'd make her terrible coffee that he always complimented. Damon was attentive in ways that felt almost too good to be true. He remembered that she didn't like mushrooms, that her favorite movie was The Princess Bride, that she got anxious before big work presentations. He'd send her encouraging texts before difficult days, surprise her with her favorite candy, listen to her complain about difficult patients without trying to fix everything. But there were moments, small ones. Times when his smile didn't reach his eyes, when she mentioned grabbing drinks with friends, the way he'd check her phone screen when notifications came in, how he'd ask detailed questions about her day, wanting to know exactly where she went, who she talked to, what time she got home. Joyce told herself she was overthinking it. Damon was just interested in her life. After dating men who barely remembered her middle name, his attention felt refreshing, not suffocating. Meanwhile, her relationship with Cameron was developing differently. They'd had 3 dates by May, all casual, all fun. He didn't text constantly or need to know her schedule. When she mentioned other friends or dates, he'd make jokes about his own dating disasters. Everything felt light, pressure-free. According to court documents, this is when Damon started to suspect Joyce was seeing someone else. It began with small interrogations disguised as curiosity. "You seem tired lately. Everything okay?" When she mentioned being busy, he'd ask follow-up questions. Busy with what? Where? With who? Joyce noticed the shift but couldn't name it. Damon hadn't become mean or controlling, just more intense, more invested in her answers, more present in her space. The first real red flag came in June during what should have been a romantic weekend getaway to Monterey. Joyce posted a photo on Instagram of the ocean view from their hotel balcony. Within minutes, Damon was scrolling through her recent posts, asking about photos from weeks earlier. "Who took this picture of you at the park?" he asked, showing her a photo Cameron had taken during their last date. Joyce felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. The recognition that this conversation was happening for a reason she didn't fully understand. "Just a friend," she said, which was technically true. She and Cameron weren't serious yet, weren't exclusive, weren't anything that required explanation. But Damon's expression changed. Subtle but unmistakable, like he'd caught her in something. "What friend?" he asked quietly. Joyce made a decision that probably saved her life, at least temporarily. She didn't tell him Cameron's name, didn't mention Tinder, didn't explain that she was still figuring out what she wanted, didn't try to have the conversation about exclusivity that was clearly coming. Instead, she said, "Someone from work took it during lunch." Damon nodded and changed the subject. But something had shifted between them, something that made the beautiful hotel room feel smaller, the romantic weekend feel scripted, the man she'd been falling for feel like a stranger wearing a familiar face. That night, while Damon slept beside her, Joyce stared at the ceiling and wondered when being cared for had started to feel like being watched. She didn't know that Damon was already planning to find out exactly who had taken that photo, didn't know that he'd started going through her phone while she showered, memorizing names and numbers and social media profiles. Didn't know that jealousy was making detailed plans while love was just trying to get some sleep. July 15th, 2021. Joyce made the mistake of leaving her phone on Damon's coffee table while she used his bathroom. According to police reports filed later, this is when Damon Benson discovered that the woman he'd been dating for 5 months was also seeing Cameron Gabriel. He found Cameron's number in her contacts, found their text thread where they'd made plans for the following weekend, found photos Cameron had sent from his construction job, messages about his kids, conversations that were clearly more than friendship. But here's what made Damon different from other jealous boyfriends. He didn't confront Joyce, didn't start a fight or demand explanations or storm out dramatically. Instead, he screenshotted Cameron's contact information, saved his address from a message where Cameron had given Joyce directions to his house, made note of his workplace, his full name, details about his schedule. When Joyce came back from the bathroom, Damon was exactly where she'd left him, scrolling through Netflix options, asking what she wanted to watch. She never knew he'd been through her phone, never realized that the man sitting beside her, playing with her hair during a romantic comedy, was already planning murder. For the next month, Damon's behavior became even more perfect. More attentive, more romantic, more everything Joyce thought she wanted. He planned surprise dates, bought thoughtful gifts, talked about taking a trip together in the fall. But he was also watching, learning her patterns, her schedule, when she'd be with Cameron and when she'd be alone, building a timeline of her life that she never consented to share. Joyce started feeling anxious without knowing why. That creeping sensation of being observed, even when she was alone in her apartment. She changed her locks, thinking maybe her landlord had been coming in. She varied her routes to work, thinking maybe she was just paranoid. She wasn't paranoid. She was being hunted by someone who brought her flowers every Friday. This case shows how quickly things can change. If you want to stay updated on stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. On July 25th, Cameron Gabriel was found dead in his home in Rocklin, shot twice in the chest, once in the head. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no obvious motive. Police treated it as a home invasion gone wrong. Cameron was a good man, no enemies, no debts, no criminal history. Just wrong place, wrong time, bad luck in a generally safe neighborhood. The investigation went nowhere. No cameras caught anything useful. No neighbors heard gunshots. Cameron's ex-wife said he hadn't mentioned any problems or threats. His co-workers described him as friendly, reliable, drama-free. What police didn't know was that Cameron's killer had been watching his house for weeks, learning his schedule, studying his habits, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate what he saw as competition. Joyce learned about Cameron's death from a mutual friend 3 days later. The news hit her like physical pain. This kind, funny man who'd made her laugh over terrible coffee shop pastries was just gone, murdered by some random criminal in a crime that made no sense. She called in sick to work, spent the day crying on her couch, trying to process the loss of someone who'd become important to her. When Damon came over that evening with takeout and flowers, Joyce was still raw with grief. She told him about Cameron's death, how shocked and sad she was to lose a friend. Damon held her while she cried, rubbed her back, brought her tissues, said all the right things about how sorry he was for her loss. He never asked how she knew Cameron, never seemed curious about why his death affected her so deeply, never showed any emotion that didn't perfectly match what a supportive boyfriend should feel. That should have been the warning. That complete lack of surprise, of curiosity, of genuine reaction to learning that someone in Joyce's life had been murdered. But grief makes people miss things. And Joyce was too busy mourning Cameron to notice that Damon's comfort felt rehearsed. August 13th, 2021. Joyce went to Damon's apartment for what she thought would be a normal evening. Dinner, maybe a movie, the comfortable routine they'd established over 6 months of dating. Instead, it became 48 hours of systematic torture that would leave her hospitalized for weeks and traumatized for life. According to court testimony, Damon confronted Joyce about Cameron the moment she walked through his door. Not gently, not sadly, but with rage that had been building for a month. He'd printed out screenshots of their text conversations, had photos of them together that he'd somehow obtained, had details about their dates, their conversations, their plans that Joyce realized he could only know from stalking her. "You lying bitch," were his first words to her. Not hello, not how was your day, just immediate, focused hatred. Joyce tried to explain. They weren't exclusive. She'd been honest about dating other people. Cameron was just a friend who'd become something more, but nothing serious, nothing that threatened what she and Damon had built. But Damon wasn't interested in explanations. In his mind, Joyce had betrayed him, humiliated him, chosen someone else over him. And for that, she needed to be punished. What happened next was documented in hospital records, police photos, and testimony that made seasoned court reporters break down crying. Damon tied Joyce to chairs, to his ceiling, to his bed. He used rope, duct tape, zip ties. He carved that swastika into her back with a kitchen knife, telling her it was punishment for being Jewish, for being a woman, for thinking she could choose who to date. He burned her with cigarettes, broke 2 of her fingers, cut off chunks of her hair, all while asking questions about Cameron, about their relationship, about details of their intimate moments that Joyce refused to answer. The torture wasn't random violence, it was interrogation. Damon wanted to know everything about Joyce's relationship with Cameron, wanted to understand exactly how she'd betrayed him, exactly what Cameron had given her that he hadn't. But here's the most chilling part. Damon told Joyce that Cameron was already dead, that he'd killed him weeks earlier, that she was being punished not just for cheating, but for mourning another man while lying in Damon's arms. Joyce realized that the man comforting her through Cameron's death had been the one who caused it, that every time she'd cried about losing him, she'd been crying to his killer. The psychological torture was worse than the physical pain. The knowledge that Cameron had died because of her, because Damon couldn't handle sharing her attention, that a good man was dead because she'd swiped right twice. For 48 hours, Joyce survived by telling herself that someone would miss her, would come looking, would save her. Her sister expected a call. Her work would notice her absence. Someone would realize she was gone. She was right. When Joyce didn't show up for work on Monday, her supervisor called her emergency contact, her sister Maria. When Maria couldn't reach Joyce either, she called police for a wellness check. Officers found Joyce barely conscious, hanging from Damon's ceiling, carved and burned and broken, but alive. Damon was sitting calmly on his couch watching television, like nothing had happened. Like the woman suspended from his ceiling was just furniture he'd forgotten to move. When officers asked what happened, Damon said Joyce had asked him to tie her up for sex games that went too far, said she'd begged him to cut her, to hurt her, to treat her like the whore she was. Even with Joyce hanging behind him, even with evidence of torture covering every surface of his apartment, Damon maintained that she'd wanted everything he'd done to her. The only time his story changed was when police told him they knew about Cameron Gabriel, knew that the same man who'd tortured Joyce had murdered her other boyfriend 3 weeks earlier. That's when Damon smiled, not sadly, not with remorse, but with satisfaction. She got what she deserved, he said. Both of them did. Joyce survived, but the woman who walked out of that hospital 3 weeks later wasn't the same person who'd swiped right on Valentine's Day. The scars on her back will never fully fade. The swastika Damon carved there is a permanent reminder of what hatred looks like when it has time to plan. Physical therapy helped her regain use of her broken fingers, but she still can't grip things the way she used to. The psychological scars run deeper. Joyce hasn't dated anyone since Damon, hasn't downloaded dating apps, hasn't been alone with a man she doesn't know, hasn't trusted her instincts about people because those same instincts told her Damon was safe. She testified at his trial in September 2023, describing the torture in detail that made the jury physically ill. Several had to leave the courtroom during her testimony. The judge called a recess twice because jurors were crying too hard to continue. Damon Benson was convicted on all charges: murder in the first degree for Cameron Gabriel's death, aggravated mayhem, torture, false imprisonment, and felony criminal threats for what he did to Joyce. He was sentenced to 71 years to life in the California Department of Corrections. He'll be eligible for parole when he's 102 years old. At sentencing, Damon maintained his innocence, said he was framed, said Joyce had lied, said Cameron's death was self-defense, even though surveillance footage showed him breaking into Cameron's house and shooting him while he slept. Cameron's family spoke about a man who coached Little League, who helped elderly neighbors with yard work, who was excited about dating again after his divorce. They said he died because he was kind to a woman who didn't know kindness could be dangerous. Joyce's sister spoke about watching someone she loved disappear even though she survived, about the woman who used to laugh at everything becoming someone who jumps at shadows, who checks locks 3 times, who can't sleep without medication. But the most powerful statement came from Joyce herself. Standing at that podium, scars visible on her arms, voice steady despite everything, she said, "You didn't break me. You tried to erase me for dating someone else, but I'm still here. Cameron is gone because of your jealousy, but his memory isn't. And every woman watching this knows now that being polite to dangerous men isn't worth their life. The case changed how California prosecutors handle domestic violence involving dating apps. New legislation requires platforms to verify identities more thoroughly, to flag accounts that show patterns of harassment, to make it easier for users to report threatening behavior. But laws can't fix the fundamental problem, that dating requires vulnerability, that finding love means risking everything, including your life, on the hope that the person across from you is who they claim to be. Damon Benson seemed perfect for 6 months. Attentive, romantic, emotionally mature. Everything Joyce thought she wanted in a partner. The red flags were so subtle, so gradual, that she didn't recognize them until it was too late. That's what makes this case so terrifying. It wasn't about an obviously dangerous man fooling a naive woman. It was about how jealousy can hide behind love, how possession can masquerade as devotion, how someone can torture you while claiming it's because they care too much. Joyce's story isn't unique. Every day people meet strangers online, trust them with their addresses, their schedules, their hearts. Most of the time it's fine, sometimes it's wonderful. But sometimes you swipe right on someone who believes loving you means owning you. Someone who thinks not being chosen justifies destroying the person who didn't choose you. Cameron Gabriel died because he made Joyce laugh. Joyce was tortured because she refused to limit herself to one option while she figured out what she wanted. Neither of them did anything wrong. They just encountered evil wearing the mask of love. So the next time you match with someone online, remember this story. Not to make you paranoid, but to make you careful. Trust your instincts. Tell people where you're going. Don't ignore red flags because you want the story to have a happy ending. Because sometimes the person promising you forever is actually planning to make sure your forever doesn't last very long. And sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who claims to love you most.